Jon Stewart does some things well, other things not so well. Here's an interview he did with Hillary Clinton and Condi Rice. Personally, I don't think Condi Rice should ever be allowed on any venue ever under any circumstances because of her participation in the Iraq War. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't, I guess teach their own. But, I'm not sure that I would be that excited to talk to either one of these folks. But if you're going to, let's push back where it's necessary. And it's interesting because it involves U.S. intervention. And there is a revisionist history going on here that apparently Jon Stewart is not aware of. Let's play this clip.
Just very briefly on Libya, because that was on my watch.
But this is not, again.
No, but I want to make a larger point because, Gaddafi was a bad actor. Everybody knew he was a bad actor, and he threatened to kill his people by cockroaches. The United States was actually the supporter of European countries through NATO and the Arab League, which for the very first time came and said, we want to be part of trying to protect the people of Libya. Now, so I feel that particular intervention, we had certain capabilities militarily that nobody else had, which we used to assist them. But, the Emiratis were flying and the Jordanians were flying, et cetera. The problem, and this is where I think you make a really good point. The problem is, okay, Gaddafi's gone. Mm-hmm. His horrible prisons are empty.
Pause it here for a second. What? See, this is the problem that I find with this. It is the case that this was a European initiative, if you will. It is also the case. I'm not so convinced that it was, the U.S. was particularly reluctant in terms of intervening. It is also the case that Gaddafi was threatening to destroy Benghazi. It is also the case, which she does not mention, that the UN Security Council signed off not on regime change, but on preventing Gaddafi's air force and military from leveling Benghazi. That is what the mandate was from the UN. China, Russia, every member of the UN Security Council was in agreement that was what the mandate was, and that's all it was. But she simply jumps over the part where all of a sudden Gaddafi is gone. There was never a mandate for regime change. And, at the time, I was supportive of the stopping of what the UN Security Council had determined was a potential genocide. And, part of that reason, for whatever it's worth, was my belief that the UN Security Council was the only mechanism or the best mechanism to determine whether genocide was happening. And I believe that the world has an obligation to stop a genocide before it happens. But the real question is how do you determine that this is going to be a genocide? And, there's no, will this be a genocide agency that you can go to and trust? It really has to be an agreement, in my mind, of the world as mediated through essentially the UN. But the problem is, the U.S. and Europe and the Arab League, to some extent, superseded this mandate, have destroyed the ability for the UN to ever make this determination again to stop genocide, and has left Libya in total disarray. This is an important element that needed to be interjected here, because the story can't be, everybody agreed to get rid of Gaddafi. That is not what everybody agreed to do. Everybody agreed to stop the genocide that he said that he was prepared to launch against, the over 250,000 people living in Benghazi. But continue.
Problem, and this is where I think you make a really good point. The problem is, okay, Gaddafi's gone. Mm-hmm. His horrible prisons are emptied. What comes next?
Right.
what comes next?
And that's always a problem because there's always a vacuum. Because look, dictators don't allow institutions to flourish. So when you take the dictator out, there are no institutions.
That's right.
So but the question becomes: do you then say let Gaddafi go ahead and kill his people because it's going to be hard afterwards, or in our case, we thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. You're going to let
pause
that
it before we get into the Saddam Hussein stuff. All right, but just to be clear, there was never a mandate for regime change. And so the question was not a binary question of do we stop genocide or do we worry about the vacuum that's created? Because there was a middle ground. Mm-hmm. We have the ability, and in fact, that's what was outlined in that UN security resolution. We have the ability to take out his means in which he could carry out that threat, not to end the war, not to for regime change. We have the ability to do that, and we superseded that mandate. And again, she's just sort of like gliding over this.
She's conflating the two. She's conflating the two for the purpose of normalizing it. Yeah.
Well, but it's
what Condi says is even worse here.
Right. She's conflating the two. She's making it binary, and it wasn't a binary situation. Yeah. And now she's going on to justify and whitewash her actions in Iraq. They knew they were lying. If Colin Powell knew it was a lie, she knew it was a lie.
Going to take him out and then do the best that you can in helping people to recover. You have to recognize that it's going to be hard once you take the dictator out. But John, it's a little bit of a false choice to say, well, then just leave the dictator in place because it won't be chaotic. It may not be chaotic.
I guess what I'm saying is
it may not be chaotic.
If we take that role on,
but it might be brutal against the people.
If we take that role on, can we sustain as a country? You know, when you think about the Soviet Union's collapse, they overextended and they got in an arms race with us and they had all these satellites. Are we overextending America's power, especially militarily, when you talk about an $800 billion defense budget?
Let's assume instead of being in a podcast studio, we were in the Situation Room, or in the tank in the Defense Department, wherever we were. Right. Okay. And we're saying, okay, what do you see on the horizon? Well, North Korea is shooting these missiles over our ally, Japan.
Right.
China is trying to build up its blue water navy so that it can compete with us anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. You've got, the Russia-China relationship. It's tricky, but we have to watch it really carefully because we don't know where that might lead. We've got Iran, still a very bad actor, and probably in addition to killing their people, will cause some external problems in order to take people's minds off it. We have a lot of issues. So do we just sit back and hope for the best, or do we try to be positioned in enough places with enough support that we can be a good ally to those who are counting on us?
And you have to watch the potential rise of terrorism again. So you have a lot on your plate.
But I would just here's the thing, that just even framing this in the context of, is it a question of whether we can sustain it? And I suppose that's a legitimate question. But the other question is like, let's talk about the success rate that we're having, which is pretty low in terms of like measured by, standard of living and safety and the birth of democracy. It's pretty low.
Yeah, what happens in Iraq? We tend to screw
these things up. It's, the idea that our interventions are a moral obligation. When we intervene, more often than not, it ends up bad for all the people there.
And it's amazing that Stewart doesn't check that point and to that degree, because we, in our intervention in Iraq in particular, both times, right? We left the population, we killed hundreds of thousands and increased communicable diseases or increased cholera in the water, those kinds of diseases, and made the infrastructure fall apart because of our intervention.
How did the institutions develop under us?
It's just like the idea that they're sitting there and saying that this is on behalf of the people is like so easily countered.
We killed a million people.
Yeah.
We killed 1 million people. I mean, I guess if you want to quibble, you could go with the most conservative estimates by the U.S. government, and maybe it's 500,000. But we created 4 million refugees, 2 million internally, 2 million externally. I mean, there's just no way to measure that and say that, you know, what we did was for the benefit of these people. I'm sorry, like you can't kill hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people and then decide we are doing this for the greater good of the country. I mean, it's just a farce. It's just a farce. You're not allowed to do that. And it again, it's just sort of skimmed over as if none of that happened. None of that happened. Continue.
Take people's minds off it. We have a lot of issues. So do we just sit back and hope for the best, or do we try to be positioned in enough places with enough support that we can be a good ally to those who are counting on us?
And you have to watch the potential rise of terrorism again. So you have a lot on your plate. But I would just say, should the United States be selective in the use of its military power?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, wow. That's great, guys.
After Afghanistan and Iraq, which we did for security reasons, not because we wanted to spread democracy at gunpoint, but for security reasons.
Although ultimately we were told that spreading democracy would make the world safer because freer countries would
I think if you actually look at the record, democratic countries actually don't invade their neighbors. Democratic countries don't.
Pause it for 1 second. Pause it for 1 second. This is one of the most offensive things about this exchange. First off, there were no security. We had no security concerns whatsoever in regard to Iraq. None. Zero. We had weapons inspectors on the ground. They were searching everywhere. The CIA was pretending that there were weapons of mass destruction. They found nothing. The weapons inspectors were literally publicly saying to the CIA, just tell us other places to look because there's nothing here. And in terms of like, you know, democratic countries don't invade their neighbors. Well, it turns out that what democratic countries do often is invade countries that are further away than their neighbors, like Iraq, for instance, like Afghanistan, for instance, like Vietnam, for instance. I mean, the fact that like, it's laughable. Democratic nations don't attack their neighbors. Well, maybe they skip over a couple of neighbors and they attack people down the road or in the neighboring town. Like, what difference does it make that they don't attack their neighbors?
Also, Tony Jute made the argument on that's sort of relevant there that an administration that came to power through, frankly, undemocratic means, like the Supreme Court in the 2000 election, like might be more willing to do stuff like that. I
would also argue that, like, who are we talking about? Is Israel a democratic nation?
That was exactly my point, right? I mean, but that doesn't constitute. But they don't feel attack their neighbor. They don't feel that it's an attack. They feel that the apartheid system that Israel has set up is a security system.
I'm not even talking about Palestine. Yeah. I'm talking about Lebanon. I'm talking about they have bombed Iran. They, people want to argue that it's somehow justifiable, but this is her statement. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. I mean, yes, England has not attacked France. Great. I mean, not in a while.
So are we morally obligated to invade and implement regime change on any country?
Mexico or Canada. Good for us. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Canada when global warming kicks in a little bit. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Emma. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, it's just they also. I mean, an easy follow up here too, and we'll see if Stewart gets to it. But would be, are we morally obligated then to invade and implement regime change regardless of the will of the people in those countries on any nation that might be engaged in offensive action against their neighbors? Like, should we invade Saudi Arabia right now, Hillary Clinton? Should we? Because right now what they're doing in Yemen, that's a neighboring country. I guess it's time for regime change in Saudi Arabia.
Continue.
It's not because we wanted to spread democracy at gunpoint, but for security reasons.
Although ultimately we were told that spreading democracy would make the world safer because freer countries would.
Well, I think if you actually look at the record, democratic countries actually don't invade their neighbors. Democratic countries don't harbor terrorists. Democratic countries don't use weapons of mass destruction. So I think
they don't harbor.
Pause it for 1 second. Pause it. Jon Stewart, I think, should be aware in terms of democratic countries using weapons of mass destruction. I mean, I'm just trying to think of like, what's the biggest weapon of mass destruction that we could come up with? Would it be an atomic bomb?
How about 2?
Would it be 2? I mean, this is just like, I mean, come on.
This is how these debates have always been sort of conducted, right? Or these discussions? Like, isn't this how we got into 9/11?
Absolutely. All the platitudes and just sort of like, well, I've said something glib. Oh, wait a second. In like white phosphorus? I mean, like who do you think invented all these things? Continue.
That was planned in Germany.
They're not aided and supported by government.
I understand.
And
that is a distinction.
But always try to look at the converse, right?
Yes.
Just because they have in some of these weak states terrorists among them, would you rather have somebody who's actually harboring them and assisting them?
Understood.
So that's the first point. The second point is that yes, we need to be more selective, but I would be the strongest voice, as I know Hillary is, when Vladimir Putin decides to extinguish his neighbor. Should the United States really just step back from that and say, well, that's kind of your business after all. Ukraine's been a part of the Russian Empire and so forth. And there are some people in the United States who would say, not in Ukraine, let's do it in Des Moines. And I think that's the bigger threat, that the United States will not feel that the American people will not feel the pull to continue to be the place that people can look when something awful like that happens.
But is it then the difference between the first Gulf War, which is Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait and the United States forms a coalition and helps push him out, versus the United States deciding these bad actors, we really are the only country. It's not that other people don't meddle, but we're the only country that actively promotes regime change.
I mean, the first Gulf War there, too, was not just a purely defensive operation by the United States. What we did to Iraq in that period was, unconscionable.
I mean, it was all. I mean, I think there's some question as to whether we invited Hussein to invade Kuwait. Certainly, there was mixed signals sent by the first Bush administration. There was a lot of lying that was done to promote that, including like fake stories about babies in incubators, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all of that is just a garbage take. And the idea that you're equating those levels of intervention with arming in a country that has been invaded, the idea that you're not creating a nuance between those things is as grotesque when they do it as when people who are arguing that it's U.S. imperialism to stop Russia from invading another country. It's just as grotesque as that, frankly. But
and there's like a kindergarten sort of like implicit idea in this America as the indispensable nation, as if the entire world looks at us as liberators, and that's just fundamentally not how the world looks at us. Certainly, parts of it do. Parts of it look at us as the exact opposite.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks, couldn't let that one slide by. I've been meaning to get to it for a couple of days, and there it is. Hi, this video is sponsored by Kamikoto Knives. These are amazing Japanese steel knives. They are made using traditional techniques. Each knife is individually inspected and comes with a lifetime guarantee. The knives come in this beautiful heavy-duty ash box, wood box, which makes a great present, obviously. The knives are used by Michelin star chefs all over the world. They have a single blade bevel, so they can get incredibly sharp. There's all sorts of different knives and cuts. Yeah, I know these things are amazing. If you're a part-time chef, or you take your knife works seriously, these knives are for you. Kamikoto is now running a Black Friday sale and offering my viewers an extra US $50 off on any purchase with the discount code MAJORITY. On top of other special offers, go to https kamikoto.com/majority. That's kamikoto.com/majority to get your knife set and help support our channel.